a lot of people are putting hundreds of millions, billions of dollars even into this asset are completely unaware of the sort of optimizations that you guys are working on. Greg, we meet here on the eve of Bitcoin's death.
They could have gone to chain with an old version long ago and you just never heard about it. You're sitting there waiting. You're saying, that's weird. I'm not getting blocks, but things must be okay. And then on the other side, they actually have taken your money and run. And an Eclipse attack is a way of using arbitrary network means, trying to trick you into not keeping on to a good person. I think most things are happening within the colored lines. It just improves velocity. Aside from making sure that this multi-trillion-dollar asset doesn't fall over in the next few years.
What would you contend is the biggest risk to Bitcoin right now?
I mean, I think it's...
Gonna be spicy. Greg, we meet here on the eve of Bitcoin's death, October 9th, 2025. Bitcoin
Yes.
Core version 30.
Yeah.
Drops tomorrow.
Somber. Very somber.
Very somber. In all seriousness, though, I think a lot of discussion, as we were just talking, before we hit record, has revolved around obviously this op return debate, whether or not the limit should be lifted or not, and the potential consequences of doing that. Maybe we'll touch on that, but I think there hasn't been enough discussion on everything else that's included in Bitcoin Core version 30. So I wanted to sit down with you and talk about what Bitcoin Core has been working on with this particular version. And I think before we do that, for the layman out there, maybe we just do like a high level refresher of what Bitcoin Core is, what is entailed in basically releasing new versions, particularly significant versions like version 30, and then we can jump into the nitty gritty of what's included.
Sure. You want me to take the lead on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. So basically there's a Bitcoin Core software is the reference client, so to speak, where it has majority kind of mind share and running share of the Bitcoin protocol itself. It includes a bunch of different parts, peer-to-peer layer stuff, consensus stuff, a wallet, which people still use, a bunch of other tools and pieces in there. A major release is done every 6 months. So on a 6-month cadence, there's what's called a feature freeze, which is, hey, stop adding new things. We're going to continue just doing bug fixes until this time. There's a branch off, which means, okay, now we have a new fork in the history that will turn into releases that will release binaries based off of this. And then eventually a release, right? With a series of release candidates, which is happening right now, and then eventually a final release. In addition to this, you also have kind of using this forked history that if there's future bugs found, if and when there are future bugs found and issues, the fixes can be applied directly on these forked off histories and do minor releases. So someday I will very highly likely have a 30.1 for various reasons. And this is how that's done. That's done on a per need basis. So right now, if I understand correctly, there's 20 and 29 minor releases being cut right now for various reasons, bug fixes and improvements. So this can happen throughout this life cycle. And then eventually, at some point, these major releases or these major branches get marked as end of life. So saying basically, we won't support this anymore. We won't do any effort to like update maintenance to this, make binaries or anything like that. And then it kind of gets stale. And so that's kind of the life cycle here.
Yeah. And taking an even further step back, just on the concept of implementations, right? You have Bitcoin sort of consensus and then implementations like Core, Knots, LibBitcoin, BTCD. They sort of have their own implementations that build software that is within consensus but does things a little differently, correct? Yeah,
so some are complete implementations. So BTCD is a good example. That's been around a long time. It's programmed in Go, the Golang, and it has a complete implementation of the consensus software. So when you get a string of bytes in the form of a blockchain, it needs to come out to the same exact answer as Bitcoin D or any other implementation. That raises the reimplementation raises the chance that there is mismatches, but those can hopefully be ironed out and debugged and fixed over time. But there's definitely like always, it's a very demanding problem, making sure they're in lockstep of consensus. And even between Bitcoin versions, there's been historical problems with that, where implementation details, like how the database is stored, causes forks in the future, right, with unforeseen events. It's been a long time since it's happened, but it's always possible with updates or not updating too.
Yeah. And where would you say we are in terms of the path of Bitcoin Core? It's like going back, I remember my first Bit Devs in New York in 2015. Russ Yanofsky basically presented on SegWit, and obviously we had SegWit getting implemented, but I think one thing over the last 12 years has been made clear to me is that Satoshi, when he launched Bitcoin, it was a bit of a spaghetti code base, and there's been a lot of work to sort of separate things within that code base, particularly, or not particularly, but one thing being like the wallet and the GUI. And it feels like the last decade of Bitcoin Core development specifically has been trying to get the implementation to a point where things are separated appropriately, more modular, and you can begin to do things that make it more complex, make it easier to build more complex applications on top of the Bitcoin protocol layer.
Yeah, there's definitely, that's one of the major things happening is historically splitting out these functionalities, getting them into their own containers that can be tested separately. So focusing on like the charlatan, he's been continuing carrying this torch on the libBitcoin kernel. So being able to separate the consensus parts out of the code base completely, expose it as an API so people can reuse this either in an alternative implementation or just for tooling. It's not exactly, a lot of this work is not glamorous in that there's cost benefits to be weighed. The cost is that when you're refactoring these very critical parts of the code base, most consensus, not wallet. Wallet's important in its own way, but for the consensus parts, making sure that when you're changing this code to make it modular, you're not also changing the behavior, which is very difficult. So as you said, Satoshi started with main.cpp, one big file that has wallet, consensus, peer-to-peer. It just has everything just jumbled in it. And it's been a long process of carefully teasing these pieces out, which is continuing today. One big project is the inter-process communication interface. So there's this project basically split up to different binaries. So you can have your Bitcoin node communicate with your Bitcoin wallet over interface, different binaries, or in the future, you could have the peer-to-peer parts handled only by a separate binary or different ideas like that. But this is like future roadmap stuff.
Yeah. Well, sticking on current roadmap stuff, like beyond op return, which is obviously the most talked about feature in core version 30. I'm looking at my notes now. It looks like there's going to be removal of checkpoint support and depreciation of checkpoints, changes to data carrier size, behavior and deprecation plan, support for multiple op return outputs per transaction, P2P relay, mempool adjustments, rate limiting and denial of services protections, refactoring, internal cleanup, infrastructure. So there's much beyond op return as well. Yeah. Let's start on checkpoints, because I think that has been not very controversial, but I think people have very, depending on who you talk to, very specific views on checkpoints. Are they good or are they bad? Is removing them good or bad?
Yeah. So checkpoints historically are anti-denial of service mechanism. So back in the day, if you spun up a node and you didn't have these checkpoints, like let's say a few versions back, maybe 10 versions back, a peer could connect to you and then hand you a bunch of data that they cheaply made using, maybe they have like one ASIC, right? They have one miner, and they make a long block header chain a very weak difficulty, and they intercept you right when you're getting connected to the network, and it just feeds you these headers. These headers, based on the current architecture at the time, are just written to disk. And so these are 80 bytes each. And so if you do enough, you're essentially just writing 80 bytes of data over and over and over to disk. And this is called, a header disk fill attack. So these checkpoints are basically saying, okay, up until this point, we're not going to accept any forks in the blockchain history. It must get to this point. And then it continues doing validation after that. This point that they picked is basically like, it would take 10% of the network's mining power, yada, yada, long time to make a header chain this long. Therefore, it makes the attack that much harder. That was like the original motivation because it was a real attack. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there, aren't the way the checkpoints are sort of like verified or decide upon, you have like a number of developers that basically just sign like, this is the right checkpoint. This is the right data.
Add a new checkpoint. All you need to do, well, let's see. I haven't thought about this in a while, but you want to make sure that reorg will not happen beyond that point. So it has to be very deep, right? It's qualitatively different than another feature called assume valid. So this one you have to say that we will never fork this one out. And so it's kind of labor intensive to like philosophically argue that is 300,000 blocks correct, 400,000, things like that. It's because you really are saying like, I will not diverge from this history. But yes, ostensibly you get into a GitHub pull request. Somebody says, I'm updating it to this height. So 500,000 or something like that. This is the hash. And everyone sits there and makes sure that, there's been 500,000 blocks on top of it since then. And this hash matches. That would be a verification.
Yeah. And how's that? What's being replaced? There's a headers presync or something like that? Okay.
Exactly. So there's this idea, this is years and years of an idea where you could say, okay, what if we have when we're freshly syncing with the network, you just have a broad idea of like how much proof of work you should be expecting. So you connect to the network and say, I'm expecting, this many zeta hashes or whatever, right? And then you get fed this header chain, but instead of committing to disk, you just walk the whole chain the whole way until you hit that minimum proof of work requirement that you've internally internalized. Once you hit it, you say, okay, that looks good. I've gotten all this way and I've only stored one header at a time in memory. Now that I've gotten this way, I'm going to do it backwards again. You just sync it twice. So you sync the headers once to verify that your disk is not going to be filled, and then you sync again to actually write to disk. And this, along with a bunch of extra testing work, allows you to remove checkpoints entirely from the code base.
Does that have any IBD trade-offs in terms of time?
Yeah, I think with the current implementation, if you have a flappy internet connection, which I had once when I was testing by flapping the internet connection. During the presync, before you've finished the first pass, if it gets interrupted, like your peer drops for whatever reason, it has to restart. So that shouldn't happen. I haven't seen that since I was testing it, but that's one constraint there. So you need to be able to download the header chain once. As soon as that's done, it goes like historical. And there are ways of improving this, but I think it's one of those engineering complexity trade-off things, which doesn't seem worth it.
Sup, freaks? This rip of TFTC was brought to you by our good friends at Bitkey. Bitkey makes Bitcoin easy to use and hard to lose. It is a hardware wallet that natively embeds into a 2 or 3 multi-sig. You have one key on the hardware wallet, one key on your mobile device, and Block stores a key in the cloud for you. This is an incredible hardware device for your friends and family, or maybe yourself, who have Bitcoin on exchanges and have for a long time, but haven't taken the step to self-custody because they're worried about the complications of setting up a private public key pair, securing that seed phrase, setting up a PIN, setting up a passphrase. Again, Bitkey makes it easy to use, hard to lose. It's the easiest 0 to 1 step, your first step to self-custody. If you have friends and family on the exchanges who haven't moved it off, tell them to pick up a Bitkey. Go to bitkey.world, use the key TFTC20 at checkout for 20% off your order. That's bitkey.world, code TFTC20. Sup, freaks? This was brought to you by our good friends at Obscura. If you've been listening to the show long enough, you know we care deeply about privacy, particularly as you peruse the web. It is important to be using a VPN, and Obscura is our VPN of choice. That is because it is a VPN built by a Bitcoiner for Bitcoiners. It is the first VPN that can't log your activity and outsmarts internet censorship. Obscura VPN works even in the most restrictive Wi-Fi networks where other VPNs simply fail to connect. With server locations across America and the globe, Obscura keeps your internet access unrestricted wherever you are. I've been using it since it launched. I see no problems with speed. I can get on YouTube TV without any problems. It simply works. They can't log. You can pay in Bitcoin. Go to obscura.net. Use the code TFTC25 for 25% off an annual subscription. It's already a good deal, their annual deal. The TFTC25 code gets you 25% more off. Go check it out, obscura.net. Use the code TFTC25.
And so I guess, again, stepping back, broadly speaking, how profound would you say that this major version release is in terms of improvement of the node software itself from an efficiency standpoint?
So are you talking about initial block download or just this?
IBD, you can even talk like peer-to-peer level. Basically, or transactions going to be matriculated through the peer-to-peer network faster.
Sure. So on the checkpoints front, that doesn't improve efficiency at all. That's just a philosophical change to make it clear that the core devs are not in charge of what your chain is. But from a performance perspective, there's been a bunch of work done by Lawrence, who has focused on, especially on the lower end of hardware for initial block download. I haven't paid very close attention to that, but I know it's happening. The other kind of transaction robustness, right, for the peer-to-peer network, there's been a bunch of work both on, there's this thing called the transaction orphanage and also package relay. So I'll start with the orphanage part, where if you turn your node on for the first time and your mempool is empty, people will start telling you about transactions which have dependencies in the mempool itself, but you don't have them. So for example, you get a second generation transaction that depends on a first. Right now, prior to 30.0, this process is a little flaky and can be interrupted by direct peers who are either malicious or malfunctioning. So 30.0 has a significant improvement to that. It was spearheaded by Gloria, Peter, and others to make this robust to single peers being malicious, or even end peers being malicious. So as long as you have one honest peer, you can make this kind of transaction catch up in the mempool.
Is this for like child pays for parent and RBF only, or?
No, not only. So it was aimed at it. So it was aimed at the kind of one parent, one child package relay project, which was deployed in full on, I think, 28.0. But the existing implementation had this weakness where if a single peer connects to you, they can throw garbage at you and basically empty out this cache, right? So basically it's the way of connecting the dots in your mempool basically get disrupted by a single peer. And the new implementation of what's called the orphanage, finding your parent, this is robust even if you have n-1 connections being attackers. So basically the one honest peer can take up a slot and make honest CPFPs and like package relay attempts, like at least one at a time. So
yeah, I'm trying to visualize that in my head. So you have let's say out of the box 8 peers, 7 of them are malicious. Node is just,
so they're feeding you orphan garbage, so stuff they don't intend to ever fix, right? Say stuff, really it's just stuff that doesn't cost them anything. They're just handing you data to look at and hold. But basically, instead of one big global bucket, which it was before, there's like a global bucket. So one peer could just go in and switch out the bucket's contents. You have n buckets. And these n buckets can be shared. It uses some optimistic pathing, like optimistic assumptions about using the whole space by one peer. But under kind of these loads where either things are very busy or the peer is being malicious, then we protect at least, we have a protections slots for each peer essentially to make sure that economically valid transactions are propagated.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think, how does the node software determine that the one peer providing you good data is actually the right data?
So it's not scoring or anything like that. It's just saying, I think if I remember right, it's saying a maximum transaction package can be like this big, like 101 kilovirtual bytes. It says, I'll protect that much per peer. So whether or not the peer is malicious or not doesn't affect this number. It's just something you allocate for that peer. So it doesn't take like historical note of who's given you useful things. It just allocates that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because many people, I mean, as Bitcoin, we hit all-time highs earlier this week. We're at a $2.5 trillion market cap, and most of the world, it's focused on Bitcoin, just views it as this inert digital capital good, which it certainly is. But I think getting into the nitty-gritty of policies like this, or not even policies, but sort of optimizations like this, really reminds me, at least in the Bitcoin protocol, is extremely complex, and a lot of people are putting hundreds of millions, billions of dollars even into this asset are completely unaware of the sort of optimizations that you guys are working on.
And these kind of things don't require coordination with other groups. So there's no new like peer-to-peer messages, no new format here. So this is just piggybacking off things which have existed for many years, which helps with velocity for moving forward with things, but also limits what it can possibly do. Larger changes might require more changes, like from a higher level, but then that requires more coordination with other projects.
Yeah,
like BTCD as an example.
Yeah. And on that note, like how's that coordination improving or deprecating over time? Is it getting harder to coordinate, or?
Well, like I said, I think most things are happening within the colored lines. So in the lines for coloring, which it just improves velocity. But yeah, like there are no commonly used from scratch implementations of Bitcoin today that are not Bitcoin Core, right? So you have Bitcoin Knots, which is a fork of Bitcoin Core, but it has per version that has all the same features pretty much with extra things added on. So that doesn't take coordination. But for example, BTCD is a few versions behind on things like, as far as I know, they don't implement the way of sharing transactions in the network using witness transaction ID, so WTX ID gossip. So this can impact decisions that Bitcoin Core makes internally, how we try to save bandwidth for our peers. We have to be cognizant of what other nodes on the network, what are they doing, and that can affect things internally as well.
Well, I mean, sticking on BTCD, there was an example of that a couple years ago now at this point when Barack did that 999 of 1000 multi-sig.
Yeah.
That knocked BTCD off the network and some Lightning nodes for a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
that was enabled by Taproot, right?
Yeah, and there's been other ones with some fuzzing work. I can't remember who did the fuzzing, but the slight difference in how the script interpreter executed a certain thing called find and delete. It's a very obscure function in the old script code base. Like this is like Bitcoin Satoshi era scripting that we don't use anymore in SegWit or Taproot. But like these minor differences can result in possible forking opportunities. And if I remember right, that was even with transactions that were standard. So someone who's malicious could have forked off BTCD, but didn't. So that was good. But it's hard, very hard.
Yeah. I mean, since you mentioned scripting, is there anything in version 30 that involves scripting?
No. So I don't think the script interpreter is one big kind of scary area that's you're hesitant to touch unless you really need to. And during normal releases, there's almost no reason to touch it. I would say the only thing that might touch is the Bitcoin kernel with interface stuff, but I think not even then. The last time I touched it was a couple of releases ago. So the pay to anchor update, that's a very minor change. That doesn't even change the definition of what's happening. It's just like minor, basically saying this is not an upgrade path anymore. Let people use it. So I would say in general, we don't touch scripting unless there's a consensus change we're trying to affect.
In my research, I thought I read something about ephemeral anchors with version 30. Is that
okay? No, so that would be go a bit of history. So ephemeral anchors is kind of two concepts, right? There's the pay to anchor part, which is the script. That was 28.0. And then ephemeral dust was the other part, and that was in 29.0. Okay. So those have been out for about 1-2 release cycles. Obviously, this package relay buff that we're deploying in 30.0 is going to help, but those key parts were already deployed.
In place. All right, that's what I read.
Yeah, and ephemeral dust doesn't affect scripting whatsoever. It's just a rule that basically says you're allowed to have one dust output if you spend it. It's pretty simple.
What are you most excited about in version 30?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff is kind of just like not letting the network fall apart kind of stuff. I think a lot of the, if I'm not exactly answering the question, but I think a lot of the work has been done at the security level. Some excellent work with the Brink fuzzing team. So like Nicholas and Marco De Leon, not Marco Falque. And team have been doing great work with the fuzzing infrastructure. So I feel like the assurances we have are much higher than prior years, including just going back a couple versions. I can go more into that if you'd like.
Well, I'd like you to go into more like not letting the network fall apart.
Well, that's part of it, right? I can get into this.
Yeah.
So historically, one problem with Bitcoin releases is that it's hard to test everything end to end in a robust fashion, where you have a bunch of layers here. You have a networking stack where you're taking in random TCP/IP data, you're talking to peers, you're receiving data from peers, you're processing data in like paths that depend on a bunch of context. So it's hard to enumerate all the possible paths. And it's hard to do this in a test that's in a robust way. But basically, Nicholas and a few others have been working on a fuzz harness, which is like putting random, intelligent but random data and inputting it directly into the binary and seeing if the behavior follows what we assume to happen. So basic ones is we assume that any message that a peer can send us won't make us crash. That's kind of obvious. But making it try to trace all the different code paths to make sure it doesn't crash is like a non-trivial thing. The other thing you can do is do kind of this, we call invariance checks, which are things like any message that this one peer, so let's say peer A sends us a peer-to-peer message, it should never cause us to disconnect peer B. So an attacker shouldn't be able to connect to me and make me disconnect with the honest peer. And so you can essentially set up a harness like that, do a few hundred iterations per second of different message patterns, including block headers, transaction announcements, pings, pongs, whatever, basically spewing stuff, valid or not, at the node and making sure that this connection with peer B stays online. And so there's been a number of like historical kind of catches with this, and I think it'll be very nice to have going forward, especially with peer-to-peer changes or policy changes too.
Is that specifically to stop something like an Eclipse attack?
Yeah, so that example, the invariance check of don't make me disconnect with my honest peer would be, yes, like I want to hear about all blocks that are honest or even transactions too. So one interesting with this orphanage update, how we're holding on to these orphan transactions, there's a fuzz harness that is essentially this, if if the honest peer is staying within their limits, then another peer should never be able to evict the honest peer's things, right? And you could basically have the same exact thing. Spews a bunch of data at it and make sure that nothing is ever evicted from this honest peer. And so the level of assurance you get gets much higher, I think. I can go on all day about this, but
I'll
spare you
more, because there's a bunch of there's definitely, with the price going up, a bunch of people are new to Bitcoin. But let's dig into this concept of an Eclipse attack. So trying to prevent this and make sure when you have a Bitcoin node, you have slots open that peers connect to, so that you can receive and pass on transactions and other data. But the concept of an Eclipse attack is if you have malicious peers that take up all of the slots interacting with your node, they can begin feeding you bad data and basically ensure that you're not in consensus with the longest chain.
Yeah. Bitcoin relies on the one honest peer assumption. So as long as one peer that you've reached out to or has reached to you is honest, then you can stay caught up on the best chain of blocks, the heaviest chain of blocks. And an Eclipse attack is a way of it's an attacker using kind of arbitrary network means, trying to trick you into not keeping on to a good person, or letting them go, or not letting them in at all. And so one way of doing that would be like send a message that causes you to disconnect a good person, right? So, exactly.
Why is it important to protect against these attacks? Like, how would what is the intent of somebody making an Eclipse attack?
So there's two reasons why you wouldn't want, two major reasons why an attacker would want to stop you. Your attacker is another miner and you're a miner. So you're mining blocks and they want to partition you from the network, get you alone. So you think you're doing good work and making the longest chain, but in reality, you're falling behind the rest of the network. So, if you're 30% of the network, if you can partition off 1% pools off the network, suddenly your 30% becomes 35%, 40% over time, right? And this benefits you greatly because larger miners tend to fare better because they're just getting ahead. The other would be, if you're not a miner, it would be something like you run a Lightning node or a node that has a watchtower of any sort. So you have like pre-signed vault transactions and you want to watch when things are happening, right? If a theft is occurring. In Lightning, it's the same idea. A Lightning counterparty is trying to defraud you, going with an old state on chain. You want to hear about the newest blocks as fast as possible, and the fastest way to do that, well, if it's being stopped entirely, then you just never hear about it, and your money goes out the window. So,
yeah, on Lightning specifically, with the what's it called?
HTLCs.
Well, the HTLCs, but if you get Eclipse attacked and you don't know that your channel counterparty has the specific transaction with your channel partner is not responding.
Commitment transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they could have gone to chain with an old version long ago and you just never heard about it. You're sitting there waiting. You're saying, that's weird. I'm not getting blocks, but things must be okay. Maybe miners are slow, right? And then on the other side, they actually have taken your money and run.
Yeah. And that it's 2 weeks for that, or 2 weeks.
Depends.
Yeah.
So with Lightning specifically, that's up to the node operator and channel partner. So you can say, I feel comfortable waiting with you running off with my money after half a day or 1 day. That's really up to you. And that's the reactive security model. Basically, it's for better security, you should turn that dial way up. So talking again about that LND exploit crashing, like that's one example why you might want a longer delay, because not only are you worried about Eclipse attacks, but you're worried about bugs and packages and your internet, getting cut off. And there's all sorts of reasons that you'd want to have these time locks be longer.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned it, bugs, what as it pertains to bugs in V30, what any being patched?
Surely. So if you go to bitcoincore.org, I'm pulling up right now. There's let's see, I'll put my foot in my mouth here. Not find it. Releases. Development security advisories. This is the place to track all the publicly known vulnerabilities. And so example, the latest one was a remote crash due to address spam. And there it'll give you all the details of what severity it's ranked. So low, medium, high, which is basically a rough ranking of how easy is it to do and how bad does it result in. So the worst would be something like chain split, right? Forking off people and making double spending happen. Second least bad would be like, I can send a message and it gets sent to everyone else and everyone crashes, right? That kind of, and you can keep going down the list too. This takes a bunch of setup. It might cost some money. And if I know a miner, that kind of thing. And that's kind of like the strata there. Yeah. But if it's and then also the severity also informs how long it takes to be told about it. Because if it's a chain split, if it's unknown and it's kind of hard to do, they might not tell you about it till a few releases after the fact. Example, like if it could be like only after the last vulnerable version was out of end of life. So we told you to update these last 3 years, you didn't. Here's the vulnerability. Versus something that's low, which is like, hey, here's a new version and here's the vulnerability. So if there is if there's a low vulnerability for 30 that's patched in 30.0, you should hear about within a couple weeks. I believe that's how it works. Mm-hmm. I'd have to look at the process again, but it was a big job to get that process lined up to make sure that people are hearing about these things and understanding that the system still has flaws and needs to be continuously fixed.
Sup, freaks? This rip is brought to you by our good friends at Silent. Silent creates everyday Faraday gear that protects your hardware. We're in Bitcoin. We have a lot of hardware that we need to secure. Your wallet emits signals that can leave you vulnerable. You want to pick up Silent's gear, put your hardware in that. I have a tap signer right here. I got the Silent card holder, replaced my wallet. I was using Ridge Wallet because it's secured against RFID signal jacking. Silent, the card holder, does the same thing. It's much sleeker, fits in my pocket much easier. I also have the Faraday phone sleeve, which you can put a hardware wallet in. We're actually using it for our keys at the house too. There's been a lot of robberies. They have essential Faraday slings, Faraday backpacks. It's a Bitcoin company. They're running on a Bitcoin standard. They have a Bitcoin treasury. They accept Bitcoin via Strike. So go to slnt.com/TFTC to get 15% off anything, or simply just use the code TFTC when shopping at slnt.com. Patented technology, special operations approved. It has free shipping as well, so go check it out.
What's up, freaks? Bitcoin's market cycles tend to follow the same old pattern: parabolic spikes, brutal crashes. This time is measurably different. The Bitcoin check from Unchained and Check on Chain shows how the 2023 to 2025 cycle has permanently reshaped Bitcoin's market structure. Inside, you'll find why volatility has collapsed, why ETFs have anchored new 5- and 6-figure price floors, and why long-term hodlers remain firmly in control. Download now, and you'll also get access to the online event featuring James Check. Bitcoin has crossed the Rubicon. Get the report at unchained.com/TFTC. That's unchained.com/TFTC.
Being about like updating to the latest version, I think that's been a big part of the conversation, is this campaign to not update to B30, which is anybody can run any version they want to as long as it's backward compatible. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the people out there telling people not to download the malware?
Well, I would say
version 30?
I would say if you don't run your node with money, it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, you might be missing out on a new RPC or something for like looking at your mempool or something, but it's not too interesting. Staying up to date matters when there's money at stake and your security of your node at stake. So money, if you're a business, you should be updating within, when possible, especially minor versions. So 28 dot something will be released, .3. I would recommend you upgrade to that if you can't update to 29.1 or 29.2 or 30.0. Best case scenario, you update to the latest and greatest, because some fixes are harder to do as a backport. So all the way to old versions, basically like this big change to there'll be some big change to this script engine or something like that. They're not going to mess with that for old versions unless the bug is easy to hit and becomes public or something like that. I'm not saying this is the case, but that's just kind of the thought process here. So I'd recommend stay off of end of life. So if you're on 27, get up to 28 at least, 28 dot whatever the last release was. and then try out the new versions too. If you need to integrate it, like BTC Pay server and all those, need to keep trying these new versions to make sure that if there's any API breaks, they get caught early and can get fixed or worked over at appropriate speed.
Yeah. And what benefits would a project like BTC Pay server have upgrading to V30 beyond what we've already discussed with the peering?
I mean, it's less a thing of benefits per se, but I mean, there's obviously the performance benefits that you get, so faster IBD and whatnot, but also just access to the latest tooling, fixes. It's more about making sure that things aren't broken, because as an example, Bitcoin Core for a long time had maintained a series of patches for this thing called BDB, which is a database format that the wallet used to use. But this format is extremely not maintained. Basically, the original project maintainers quit a long time ago, or don't do the patches necessary. So Bitcoin Core had to do that. That support is officially gone for 30.0. So there's a tool in there to migrate your wallet to the new version. But if you're like running a larger software stack like BTC Pay server, there's probably more involvement on making sure that your users go from the old format to the new format properly.
And what is the new format? Did a bunch of developers simply just write a new database?
No, it's just SQLite, I think. Okay. Yeah, just like a standard format that works for the sizes we care about. So
it's funny thing because like SQLite, that's become extremely popular in recent years. I've talked to Justin Moon a lot about the powers of SQLite, but that's
it's
another
extremely
thing we're dealing with Bitcoin being released in 2009 and the tools that were at Satoshi's.
Yeah. And every time the project gets to get rid of a dependency like BDB, the better off we are, because these like OpenSSL used to be a thing that we had to have in consensus that was removed a long time ago. There's all these different little projects that are being basically re-implemented, just the parts we need, and then the rest is removed, or we swap them out for really standard components.
Yeah. So the last time we spoke about op return was when we saw each other in person in May or June?
May, I think.
May, BTC++, where very interesting get together of Bitcoin developers in Austin, Texas. And I guess just to cover that whole debate of op return, how would you frame it from your perspective?
So I think that was kind of where I stopped paying attention, because I went in person and was able to finally get out kind of like, well, what's their like, what do they think the solution really is? We all agree there's some level of problem. Some people think it's catastrophic. Some people think it's spammy and noisy, but we don't love the JPEGs, but what do we do about it? And Bitcoin Core kind of people have been saying, well, it's really hard to disentangle what's spam mechanically and automatically without causing great centralization force and peer-to-peer problems in general, right? We're trying to save the moneyness by punishing JPEGs, but then we end up hurting the moneyness, the fundamental moneyness of Bitcoin. Whereas I asked, like, hey, what is your ultimate vision for Bitcoin Core if we went down your path? And essentially it ended up being this argument of, we'll have kind of a scripting language, or possibly like, this list of bad scripts that we have to pass around to other nodes, and people are automatically updating their configuration scripts to like filter these. And as you can see, like this kind of method is inherently centralizing. And I basically came away with, I don't think this bridge is gappable. There's been some efforts in the NOTS community to do this, where you essentially have a web of trust of filters, and it just breaks the inherent moneyness of Bitcoin. And I don't know what else there's to say about that. I mean, you can ask more questions, of course.
No, I mean, I think I fall in the camp of I hate the JPEGs. I think they're annoying. I don't like that they're bloating UTXO set, or maybe it's not even JPEG. It's just like the arbitrary
Ordinals. Yeah.
Ordinals, arbitrary
Ordinals
data.
fills up the UTXO set. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's jump into that. Like the core argument for changing op return and increasing the limit, you're taking the limit cap off altogether, basically comes down to the fact that people that are injecting arbitrary data into transactions are doing it in a non-optimal way that's bloating the UTXO set, correct?
Yeah, almost everyone does what's called an inscription, which means in SegWit or Taproot, you can put the JPEG essentially in the input side and you get the witness discount for it. So you pay 4 times less. Op return is an older way of doing it, which costs 4 times as much. And the argument is that if you need it to be if you need some sort of payload to be in the output, like let's say a cryptographic proof, it's called a Groth16 zero knowledge proof. That's too big it's bigger than 80 bytes. But it needs to be somewhere in the transaction. So what people were theorizing about doing, and actually had software to do, is stuff it in UTXOs that look like public keys. And so nodes have to store this forever, just in case someone tries to spend that output. So if there's already these myriad of ways of embedding data, more or less harmful, basically we hand them the least harmful method and say, here, use this one. I also have personal opinions on kind of how opinionated we should be about what the best wallet software is. So I worry that if people set their own, hyper-specific arguments like knots like arguments and knobs, that it really causes mistakes and ends up kneecapping the moneyness of Bitcoin in other ways. So I'll give you one example. For the NOTS 29 release, which is the latest release they have, the new version of Lightning channels would not be able to propagate on their nodes if you use the default settings. And so I think that's a great example of either lack of communication on their part of what they're trying to filter, or just ignorance, right, of what they're doing is causing the moneyness of Bitcoin to be hurt for the sake of saving Bitcoin, so to speak, supposedly. I can go more into that if you want.
Yeah, like how would it mess up the Lightning channels?
So the new style Lightning channels, as well as the ARC, Spark, there's probably a few others, they're all using this pattern of the truck transactions, so version 3 transactions. Not only is it the version 3 being valid to relay, but it allows them to be 0 fee if paid for by a child. So specifically in NOTS 29, the current release, those are invalid. It does not allow those to propagate. So your commitment transaction will simply be dropped by your local node. Even if that was fixed, then they also ban ephemeral dust. So remember, this ephemeral dust is the rule where you're allowed to have a single dust output in a transaction as long as it's cleaned up immediately after in a package. And they disallow the function where this dust could be like 1 Satoshi, 2 Satoshi, all the way up to the dust limit. So Taproot, the smallest output is allowed normally is 330 Satoshis. So 1 through 329 would be considered invalid and simply dropped, even if it's spent. And again, the motivation here is to stop JPEGs because ordinal theory, whatnot. But in reality, this is just like this feature is being used in the new Lightning channels. Like that space of the feature is intended to be used. And so this is essentially going to kneecap anyone using the software and trying to do self-custodial payments using Lightning.
When you say V3 transactions, is that like version 3 of Bech32 or?
No. It's the transaction version number. So there's a version field. Mm-hmm. The version field 3 on 28.0 and newer is considered standard for relay, but it also enables things like 0p transactions for technical reasons that I won't get into here, but that's kind of like the gist of it.
Yeah. No, you told me before we hit record that you really haven't been paying attention since BT Plus BTC++, but I think I came away from that week because I was highly, I don't want to say triggered, but I was like a little emotional. Like, what is going on here? I don't want to.
I was a little demotivated. I thought there was a chance that we would bridge some of this gap and come to an understanding where there's some solution. But after that, I didn't think so. And I think it was born out to be true. I don't see it months later.
No. Get a lot of, and it's funny. I've been a lot of people hopping in my benchies on X and on YouTube and other places saying, why aren't you talking about this? Like, I don't want to breathe air into it. And I think I walked away from BTC++ with the conclusion in my mind, like, these things are consensus valid. Like, there's nothing you can do to stop valid transactions from getting in. If you want to change it, you got to have the harder conversation of a soft fork to change off return or something like that. And if you're not focused on that, then I think it's you're looking for a Pyrrhic victory there. And then, I mean, I guess to be critical of Bitcoin Core, the project, I think we talked about this in May in person too. Like, I think it's just a massive communications PR failure that I think that's why many people have gotten so triggered and remain triggered. Is the perception is that Bitcoin Core is changing policy rules arbitrarily without talking to the broader Bitcoin user base.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. And I find it a little baffling that the response to that is to switch to a distribution that changes policy on a whim of one guy, and completely ignorant too. Like, no, I mean, I guess I'm being pointed here, but mentioning these, like, they did not know that they're breaking people's expectations of the network. And as far as I know, they haven't changed course. So who's defending the moneyness of Bitcoin? I don't see how it would be them.
Well, what do you think happens tomorrow? Do you think Bitcoin dies tomorrow when version 30 is released?
I'm firmly on nothing ever happens team. I think it's not a black swan event, no matter what. It's like a very, very minor thing. So I'm happy if people just update to relatively minor, relatively recent releases, just for the health of the network, for security reasons, and also just the weekly transactions, femoral dust, all those things getting out there. It's good to see these getting traction in real life.
Yeah. I said this on Rabbit Hole Recap. I forget, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I stated during that episode, like, we're going to look back a year from now and we're going to be laughing that I think this is what I think is going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen, but I am also firmly in the nothing ever happens camp, and
yeah,
I think we'll look back and be like, remember we were fighting about that.
I think it's important to try to take some lessons from it, whatever those lessons are, and then, I mean, some of the lessons are negative, right? But basically, doing what you can to keep your brand as far as like a infrastructure project which doesn't lose people's money, I think, making that really your focus, rather than trying to cater to every user at once, which is impossible, but also just trying to communicate that it's okay if people run their own node software that differs, right? It really is up to like the person, right? Self-sovereignty. And I think people keep forgetting this fact that running the node 99.9% of the time is for you, right? It's for your sovereignty, your security, your privacy. You're not generally helping the network doing this. This almost all the time, it's just for you. And that's where the focus should be.
Yeah. I think there is a broad misconception about the power of an individual full node and its influence on the rest of the network. It's funny rehashing these conversations that happened during the block wars, the concept of an economic node. And I think you can definitely socially signal by running a certain version of a certain implementation, but
Policy ends up being kind of like the mirror inverse of that, right? So the block size wars was the intolerant minority, where basically it's like if a small fraction of economically motivated users will reject things consensus, then it kind of there's brinksmanship involved that might enable soft fork. But with policy, it's the inverse, where a small percent of people who are tolerant of a certain transaction format lets them through in practice, even if 90% of the network doesn't. And I think there's a bunch of metaphors here, like technical allegories, pretty much, or parallels.
That's a really good insight. I never thought of it that way. The inverse, consensus versus policy. Intolerant minority can affect consensus more than they could policy.
A tolerant minority can make more things relay. They can't make less things relay. An intolerant minority can affect consensus. Like shrinking consensus is the easier part, while expanding policy is the easier part on the policy side of things. It's easy to expand. It's hard to restrict. It is kind of like the mirror universe here. It's hard to hard fork. It's easier to soft fork. In relay, it's easier to expand, harder to restrict.
So moving forward, when doomsday comes and goes tomorrow, we move on. I think the dust will settle. A lot of questions around ossification, what changes are needed in Bitcoin. Like, obviously, Bitcoin Core isn't going to stop working on Bitcoin after version 30's released tomorrow, and the same can be said for any other developer working on any other implementation. But in your mind, what are some of the top priorities that people need to be focusing on beyond what gets released tomorrow?
Well, I mean, doubling down on the security infrastructure, but I already talked about that. So aside from making sure that this multi-trillion-dollar asset doesn't fall over in the next few years, there is a continuing conversation on what people call covenants or scripting soft forks. I think that'll continue. Rusty Russell has submitted a somewhat serious, like more concrete proposal for his kind of rewrite of Bitcoin script, where taking Bitcoin script and turning it up to 11. But there's like a number of different ways that script updates can be done, like for what you're trying to accomplish and how you do, and that informs how you do it. So he has one way. Russell O'Connor has like Simplicity, if you've read up about that, and then AJ also has his own bullish kind of Lisp-based programming language. And I think beyond the near term, we need a bigger discussion about if we want to continue iterating on scripting in Bitcoin, what's the best way to do it? And that's a big engineering question, as well as, theoretical and engineering.
Yeah, I had Paul Sharon a couple of months ago to talk about Simplicity launching on Liquid Mainnet. And we talked about the potential of it getting implemented at the protocol level. It seems like Simplicity, I mean, obviously Blockstream's been working on it. I think the paper dropped, like 12 years ago, maybe even
long time ago.
And it's been talked about since then. Finally got it live on mainnet on Liquid to basically showcase what can be done there. But it seems like, I mean, Simplicity's always sort of appealed to me, but I think the common pushback is like, how are you going to get this into?
Common pushback is, it's very complicated. It's a lot of lines of code. But if you look at any other proposal, they're making severe trade-offs too. And I think the community will have to have an honest discussion that doesn't involve brinksmanship of like, you shouldn't be arguing necessarily that Bitcoin isn't worth the work. I would say like this, because there are facets of simplicity or simplicity-like solutions that really appeal to me as well, that aren't maintained with the Great Script Restoration or Bullish. And so I think this discussion has to be made. More near term, Antoine and I have been working on a kind of smaller proposal, which is template hash, check from stack, and internal key. Have you had Antoine on for that?
No.
Okay. But a few months back, basically it's a slight revision and reframing of another proposal where it's like CTV as well as checksig from stack. And we became intrigued with this kind of pairing and did a ground up rethink of how we would do it post Taproot era. And that was our proposal, essentially. It's a CTV-like widget that's TapScript only. Checksig from stack, just bit 348, and internal key, which is bit 349, as is.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to the ossifiers who are worried about the unforeseen consequences of messing with something like Bitcoin script? Because they would argue, I would argue too, that there was unforeseen consequences with the combination of SegWit, Taproot, with the ordinals, manifestation. I guess how do you have conversations around that and really war game through the potential for stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because the things I felt that were deficient in Taproot are probably not the same ones, like from an unforeseen perspective. So when I look at lessons learned from, I mean, there's probably a bunch from SegWit, but let's say from Taproot, since it's more recent, we learned things like, hey, maybe we should have more tooling in place before we actually talk about activation, because in Taproot, the way keys are published on the network, there are these 32-byte keys, what we call X-only keys. And this ended up, it may or may not be the right decision in the end, but we didn't have a fuller discussion from the tooling side of things. How do you make cryptographic protocols with this slightly different public key format? And it ended up complicating certain protocols. I think it ended up okay, but the lessons I took away are essentially, hey, tooling needs to be like much more defined before these kind of larger changes are done. And we're taking that to heart. So part of our efforts is not only saying, hey, these capabilities, these opcodes and capabilities enable some cool use cases. Hey, look at these blog posts we made. But much further than that, we want to have the tooling ready to go, applications deployed in like SIGNet and maybe custom test nets before we even talk about things like activation. And we're far from that. Even from a mindshare perspective, we're far away. But from a quality assurance perspective, we're also far away. So that's kind of like the lesson I took away, I guess, from Taproot.
Yeah.
So like if it activated tomorrow, ideally we'd be able to have wallets that just spin up and use things the next day, right? Or, practically the next day. And with Taproot, it ended up being like this activated in 2019 or whatever. And then like, it took 4 more years for Musig to be formalized and another 2 years to be standardized. And PSBT support is taking years. And ideally more of this would have been done prior to activation.
Yeah. And it's insane problem we have as Bitcoiners, as a species, as we're becoming more dependent to a degree on this monetary protocol. It's approaching $2.5 trillion in value. Not only that, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, we have all these different second layer solutions, whether it's Lightning, Liquid, Arc, Spark, throw Xiaomi and Mints in the bag as well. Not silent payments. What does Spark use? State chains. Yeah, silent payments too, right? All these, you have this whole tech stack that's all kind of interlinked in certain ways, and the velocity is just kind of slow because there's a lot more layers to it. Even if I snap my fingers and we got some magical software, it would still take years for adoption. Yeah. This is out of left field, but just because it's a big topic of conversation, I think when it comes to like fuzz testing, does AI help at all with this? Is there any vibe coding that helps?
I was briefly considering today, could you get reasonable vibe coded fuzz harnesses? So but with fuzz testing, you really want to make sure, like, you need a lot of subject matter expertise to define it. Otherwise, it does like basically really random And if it's really random data, then it doesn't really make any meaningful progress. It's trying random numbers essentially with no understanding of what it's doing. But the way you can write the harness with intelligence, so maybe there is, I wouldn't rule it out. I think AI for writing testing is probably one of the best avenues to go forward with in this space. I'm not sure how much people have been doing it.
I was just going to ask, is anybody working on that?
Probably.
What would you, obviously there's been a lot of controversy and shit slinging going on over the last 8 months. What would you say is the mental state of your average developer right now?
I mean, it depends. Obviously, this kind of drama makes maintainers more risk averse in some ways, right? So risk averse could mean they're going to ignore issues longer, or they're just going to make snap decisions and just say, like, this is the way it is. Outside of that, I think people are ready to get back to work, working on interesting things. So like one project that I think will become more important as time goes on, possibly, is AJ is working on this thing called template sharing, which is, and we basically want these future relay discussions to be less political. And so one way of doing that is solving some parts of it technically, that you kind of you're more likely to allow people to have different mempool policies as long as it doesn't affect convergence of the network in blockchain terms. So we don't want to slow down block propagation on the network to make mining fair. So if there are like technical ways of mitigating this, even when people disagree on mempool policies, that would be a big win. And so I think arguing less about what a default number should be in a config file, I think going this way is more fruitful.
Yeah. What would you contend is the biggest risk to Bitcoin right now?
That's a great question. Biggest risk. I mean, I think it's the legal one for users and developers still. It's a stablecoin people, I would say, are a political force in America, but still not quite there for Bitcoin, right? We still don't have explicit legal protections in congressional writing promising that they won't jail us for writing code that helps people move money, right? Privacy is going to be a big bear to tackle. I think privacy is essentially illegal on the internet, and they're going to want to keep it that way, even if people figure out how to do coin joins en masse and keep off-chain. Just yesterday I was talking about Spark, this Spark service, how it's their policy to, on an indexer, publish every single transaction for every single account. So if you have someone's Spark address or you get a single Bolt 11 invoice from them, a Spark user, you can look up their entire transaction history, including balance. And my guess is, they have their stated reasons, but my guess is they're worried about pushback from the federal government, whether that's invasive data requests or regulatory crackdown on their service for being, not for money transmission. I mean, they'll try to claim it, right? So the government could still try to claim that they're money transmitters, even though they claim they're not. And this could be instigated by a service offering practical privacy. So I think that those are some of the finer tightropes they're walking, these wallet services.
Yeah, I saw your quote tweeting Wallet Satoshi, which is moved to Spark.
Yeah,
as their back end.
Exactly.
And that's insane. It's like anybody who's technical enough can sort of probe that data.
Yeah, it's a little surprising. I'm obviously not happy with it, but I think, to be clear for that thread, I'm bringing this up because wallets like Wallet Satoshi have to somehow communicate these expectations of non-privacy to their users. And I think that's very difficult. Prior, like in previous iterations, they were the custodian. And so Wallet Satoshi says, I'm not going to publish everything on a database. but now they're relying on a back end that does. How do you update the mental framework of, how do you get informed consent from your users for that? That's really challenging. And I'm not sure what the solution is for that.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull this up.
Yeah.
Since there isn't real privacy against the Spark operators, that everyone should be searchable in a public index. So it's like, yeah, they're not even.
That is their stated. That's what they said. So I feel comfortable saying that's what they said. And then you can, Ben Carmen whipped up a tool for me in about 10 minutes, probably vibe coded it. There we go. So if you get someone's Wallet Satoshi invoice, it immediately pulls up their account. And so I tested it on my own, which I don't use it seriously, but it would show my test transactions to my real Lightning wallet. So, that's like, how do you communicate that to a user, especially a new user? How do you communicate that to a user of Venmo, which has one, they're maybe okay with the service knowing, but not everyone in the world knowing if they can switch a button. Yeah.
No, that's what I was going to say. It's like, even if the operator knows every transaction, doesn't mean you broadcast.
Yeah, I'd be more sympathetic if they just said, yeah, and we give you a button in the API or whatever to say, don't publish. And then they just didn't do that. I'd be pretty sympathetic to that.
Yeah. Now the privacy war is going to be a big one. But I saw Dan Gold from PayJoin Dev Kit a couple of weeks ago. It seems like they're making good progress. And when it comes to PayJoin specifically, I think we're going to have to position it as a way to as a sort of cost saving technology for exchanges specifically.
Yeah, that's the tough thing. It seems like to make it palatable regulation wise, we have to say it's something else. It is, right? PayJoin and CoinJoins in general can be potential savings. Lightning is a fee savings vehicle that gets you practical certain levels of privacy better than on-chain. And Arc, Spark, all these other systems can also potentially offer those kind of privacy trade-offs. Maybe Trojan horse using the original systems, right?
Yeah. That's why, I don't know what your thoughts are on Chummy and Mints, but I love them. I love the Cashew wallets and the Pediment wallets that I interact with, and
yeah, I think the big challenge is who runs the mint, right? Because they cannot claim they're non-custodial, like by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
So who runs them? Yeah, how much of a centralizing force is that, right? Because it's more efficient if everyone's on the same mint. Maybe there's, decentralization back pressure from we have the Lightning network that interconnects everything. So maybe the centralization pressure isn't as big, right? You just have thousands of operators. I guess we'll see.
Some people think the AIs are going to run the mints. They're going to recognize it's superior money for the agentic framework, and they're just going to run the mints. No, it is.
Imagine the conspiracy theories there.
Yeah, now we're getting into the philosophical side of things, because no matter what part of the stack we're talking about, Spark has to make this privacy trade-off because of the government. Maybe other things like PayJoin won't get implemented by exchanges because they're worried about the regulatory and compliance blowback. Obviously, Chummy and Mints can provide not only incredible privacy, but since they're separate from Bitcoin and very modular, you can build a literal new banking stack from scratch that gives you all the functionalities you'd want from a banking service with better, more secure tech, minus the centralization pressures of the mint operator. It's we have the potential to build an incredibly robust, secure, private financial system, which arguably should be what everybody wants. But not for some reason, but the government just messes that up.
Also, the user demand just isn't there for censorship-resistant payments. There obviously is some, but in the West, as an example, no one seems to care. And what would make them care, right? What events might transpire that will make them care, and will we be ready for them? That's the other one too, right? We're building, I think, like general HODL tech is pretty much solved, I would say. Like Coinbase seems to be doing okay with 8 quadrillion Bitcoin or whatever, but you know, the payment technology still isn't there. And so if Bitcoin payments actually need to take off in a non-custodial way in the future, the infrastructure needs to be there. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at this future.
Hey, we had a good step in the right direction yesterday with the Square announcement. People have been waiting for 7 years for that.
Yeah.
No, I think the pressure is going to be digital ID, and my theory is that they're going to try and thrust something, WorldCoin or something like it, on the masses, and people are not going to be fond of staring into the orb. And then they'll care.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, now we're getting something like, do you have, are you optimistic about the potential for the user experience and the products built on top of Bitcoin to get to a point where, regardless of people's desire to use peer-to-peer cash, the experience is simply superior to the incumbent system that just gets adopted because it's better UX?
I mean, it depends on the layer. It's already better than some things. International wires are trash and will continue to be trash for a long time. But I think some of the payment UXs are really nice in Bitcoin, but a lot of them take steep trade-offs in the self-custody dimension. If you just park your money on, this is where it still works, right? Parking your Bitcoin on Coinbase is only useful if you're only interested in trading on Coinbase or using base chain or whatever. But if you want to actually send someone over the Lightning Network a payment, I think it still works, but there's all this regulatory pressure to not let it succeed, right? And I think that's where all the friction is. So go ahead.
I did this last week. We had a 1031 offsite with the portfolio companies. We're at this resort, and over the course of the 3 days, got to know some of the people working at the resort, particularly the bar. And last night, go to tip him. He's got a Coinbase account. I was like, I'll send it over Lightning, and the UX was just completely abysmal. And I thought, like, I got a confirmation on my end, but it never hit his account. And I got a confirmation that the payment was received. But from what I understand, and I didn't realize this till after I left him, Coinbase is asking users that accept Bitcoin over Lightning to sort of ask for personal information of the counterparty.
Exactly.
And the transaction. It's like, what?
Yeah. I think it's incredibly centralizing in that no one will want to do that. But if the payments volume isn't high enough, that people won't jump that hurdle to go on the other side. Because if money's sitting in an ETF or whatever, everyone's happy with it. They don't need to ask permission because it's not going anywhere. But if you want to make payments, this is where all this friction shows up, especially if you're trying to send from a Coinbase or regulated institution.
Well,
I don't know if we can fix that aside from legal changes.
It's completely immoral, though. Like, I sent the Bitcoin, like, I sent it.
Oh, yeah.
From my Lightning wallet.
I'm making a descriptive. Yeah.
Oh, I know. But like, just like I was thinking about it through. I was like, wait, I sent $15, $20 worth of Bitcoin, whatever it was, to this wallet. Like, obviously it's centralized. Coinbase is presenting and running the Lightning node, presenting the invoice. They have the Bitcoin sitting somewhere in their account. The guy that I sent it to,
Lightspark does, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, Lightspark, whatever. It's sitting somewhere in a centralized third party, and that guy's never going to get the money. And I sent $20 that I'm never going to get back. Because I don't think this guy's going to be able to find me to ask me for my home address and all that. And when he does, I'm not going to give it to him. I'll say spin up another invoice using Zeus or something like that, and I'll send you the Bitcoin there. But like, Coinbase just holds that money now.
Yeah. So I think that's where you'll see the rise. Like, if Spark does take off, that's the niche it'll fit. There's an unfortunate privacy thing, but if you if you're willing to accept a system that says it's self-custodial, and it kind of is, custodial at least, maybe that's enough for users to get onboarded. But is that a world we want to go to versus something more private? This is like a big challenge.
Yeah. I mean, talking to Matt Corallo earlier this year, he's pretty optimistic that self-custodial Lightning will see a step function improvement.
It's better. Yeah, it's definitely better than before. I think a lot of you'll hear like, oh, this new layer 2 will fix all Lightning's, all the issues Lightning has. But you look under the hood, it's either making custody trade-offs, security trade-offs, or it's making the same assumptions as like Lightning needs improvement. So it's like, oh, it's instant transactions. And you say, how do you get instant transactions? Oh, you just trust this person not to sign twice. You're like, come on, like, that's zero comp trust, right? So I think in this industry, there's still a bit of that, even in the Bitcoin side. It's kind of hiding what models people are buying into. But I mean, I'm optimistic too. So I think there's enough there for another 5-10 years of development and smoothing out the processes.
Yeah. And in the meantime, in parallel, to your point, we need to wage the campaign to abolish the Bank Secrecy Act, where all this insane privacy infringing compliance and regulation comes from.
Can we somehow get the BSA as a person to insult Trump or something? I'm trying to think of a way of, instigating constitutional crisis, because then maybe the courts will strike it down anyways. It's like, it wasn't constitutional anyways.
Yeah. No, it is insane. We're dealing with the remnants of mistakes made many decades ago. Funnily enough, 1970, I think, is when the BSA was implemented.
And it's interesting to see the thing that was vaguely probably not constitutional at the time accepted because we didn't have computing widely. Now that's flipped, and kind of seeing the straws being grasped by the statists who want everything to be reported at all times. It's really stark, I guess. Yeah. And admittedly, I haven't been following it as closely as it probably should be, but last I heard this doesn't have anything to do with privacy, but to your earlier point about legal ramifications of writing open source software that allows people to use Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer fashion. There was positive language in the Clarity Act, which hasn't been passed yet. I don't know if it's been taken out or revised out, but has not yet been taken out. But there's always a worry that until the job's done, it's going to get horse traded for something else, right? Because again, you have the stablecoin bros, stablecoin contingent, and you've got the kind of Elizabeth Warren contingent at the moment, and people are worried that Elizabeth Warren actually hates Bitcoin more than she hates stablecoins. So maybe a trade would happen there.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm optimistic long term, but you need to actually battle this out in Congress and in the courts.
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to call it a pipe dream, but what would be incredibly badass is that if they did push and put the regulatory pressure on, if you just got back to the site for Punk Roots and you just had a bunch of pseudonymous devs pop up and just start launching things without anybody knowing who they are.
So I have a slightly contrarian point of view on this, I guess. Yeah, I think it's a good idea of something like that, but I see America as a potential base for freedom through freedom of speech and computing. And if I just snap my fingers and America became the place where all development, all non-custodial development is blessed legally and protected 100%, and there's no question that you're going to be dragged out of your house because your system helped enable someone else to do money laundering, I think that'd be a huge win for the world. And I think we can push that way. I don't think that everything bad for me as a developer is good for Bitcoin, I guess is my point. I think we can kind of push the other direction, make it easier in countries with law and order, potentially more law and order, and export that goodness worldwide through the internet.
Oh, Greg, I like that. I like that optimistic view. We should lead by example.
I still
again,
have,
like I said earlier,
I mean,
the potential, the tools, the potential, it's all right. Like we can build
yeah,
an incredibly transparent, robust, resilient, secure, relatively private financial system. The potential's there.
Like, in general, freedom of speech has gotten stronger and stronger in the United States. The one caveat is, but you talked about money. And suddenly this is like a legal loophole to throw you in jail forever. So I think like just keep maximizing these First Amendment gains as far as we can in the next few years, right? I think it's possible.
I do too. Let's keep pushing.
Yep.
It's been awesome. This is the first time in a while I've gone deep on Bitcoin Core stuff. It always reignites the subdued nerd in me, and it makes me miss New York bit devs in the heydays when I would nerd out with this stuff for I mean, I think I went to probably 80% of the bit devs between 2015 and 2020, and it's easy to forget the intricacies and the complexity involved in actually maintaining and improving the Bitcoin protocol.
Yeah.
And most people are completely unaware.
Yeah, like with anything else, there's a lot going under the hood. It doesn't directly, it's not a feature for the user, so it's hard to see and show value.
No, I'm thinking too, like as more institute, like you have faith that, the last question, you have faith that like as more institutions get in, if banks get in, that they'll have tech departments that will understand the importance of understanding the intricacies of the protocol level.
That I don't know. I think it's kind of, we're also in an eternal September kind of situation. I would have expected more industry feedback in a direct way, but you don't get that. People don't even really complain when things are broken. It is like there's a feedback loop problem with development. So I'm looking forward to find ways to solve that too, especially as things get bigger.
All right. Think about it, freaks. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
I appreciate you having me on, and excited for the future still. The future 2 days from now.
The Bitcoin dies tomorrow, so enjoy it while it lasts, freaks. You got 24 hours. Yeah.
All Bitcoin transactions are legal the next 24 hours. Yeah. All right. See ya. Thanks.
Peace and love, freaks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of TFTC. If you've made it this far, I imagine you got some value out of the episode. If so, please share it far and wide with your friends and family. We're looking to get the word out there. Also, wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, make sure you like and subscribe to the show. And if you can leave a rating on the podcasting platforms, that goes a long way. Last but not least, if you want to get these episodes a day early and ad-free, make sure you download the Fountain podcasting app. You can go to fountain.fm to find that. $5 a month, get you every episode a day early, ad-free, helps the show, gives you incredible value. So please consider subscribing via Fountain as well. Thank you for your time, and until next time. Okay.